This war didn't start with smartphones, laptops, or trillion-dollar valuations. It started with two young men who believed the future belonged to them, but for completely different reasons. One believed technology should feel personal, emotional, almost artistic. The other believed technology should be practical, dominant, and everywhere. And when those two visions collided, the modern tech industry was born. Apple versus Microsoft is not just a corporate rivalry. It's a battle of philosophies. A story of imitation and accusation. Of domination, collapse, and resurrection. Of one company being saved by the very rival that helped push it to the brink. And most importantly, it's a war that never really ended. At different moments in history, each company seemed invincible. Microsoft once controlled personal computing so completely that most people didn't even notice it. Windows ran the world. Offices, schools, governments, almost every screen looked the same. Apple, on the other hand, nearly disappeared. Analysts openly discussed its death. Many believed it was only a matter of time. Then everything flipped. Apple became the most valuable company on Earth. Microsoft was dismissed as boring, slow, irrelevant, a relic of the past. So who actually won? Was it Apple, with its obsessive focus on design and products people camp overnight to buy? Or was it Microsoft, the silent giant whose software runs businesses, servers, governments, and much of the internet, often unseen but unavoidable? To answer that, you have to go back to the very beginning. Back before dominance. Back before betrayal. Back when neither company had power, only ambition. Apple and Microsoft were born in the same era, but from completely different mindsets. Apple came from rebellion. Steve Jobs didn't want to build tools for corporations. He wanted to build machines for people. Technology, in his mind, was an extension of creativity. Computers should be intuitive, beautiful, and emotionally engaging. They should disappear into the background and empower the user. Microsoft came from strategy. Bill Gates wasn't obsessed with aesthetics or emotional connection. He was obsessed with leverage. His goal wasn't to make the best computer, it was to make the software that every computer needed. Gates understood something critical early on. Whoever controlled the operating system controlled the industry. Apple built vertically. Hardware and software together. Total control. Total vision. Microsoft built horizontally. Software everywhere. Hardware didn't matter. Distribution did. At first, these differences didn't feel like conflict. In fact, Microsoft worked closely with Apple. Bill Gates wrote software for the Macintosh. Steve Jobs trusted him. He believed Microsoft was a partner. That trust would not last. When Microsoft began developing Windows, Apple executives immediately saw something familiar. Too familiar. Menus. Windows. A mouse-driven interface. Concepts Apple believed were uniquely theirs. Steve Jobs felt betrayed. In his mind, Microsoft hadn't just taken inspiration, they had stolen the future Apple invented. Microsoft didn't see it that way. Gates believed ideas weren't owned. Execution was. Apple, he argued, didn't invent graphical interfaces, they commercialized them. And Microsoft simply did it better, cheaper, and at a scale Apple couldn't match. The lawsuits didn't change the outcome. Windows exploded. PCs flooded the market. Manufacturers adopted Microsoft because it was flexible, affordable, and everywhere. Apple stayed expensive, controlled, isolated, and slowly, Microsoft won the war of scale. By the early 1990s, Microsoft had won completely. Windows was the default. Office was unavoidable. Bill Gates became the richest man on Earth. Microsoft didn't just dominate, it defined personal computing. Apple, meanwhile, was falling apart. Internal chaos. Confusing product lines. Leadership infighting. And in one of the most shocking decisions in tech history, Apple fired Steve Jobs, the man who created the company. Without Jobs, Apple lost its identity. Sales declined. Developers abandoned the platform. Consumers stopped caring. By the mid-1990s, Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy. Cash reserves were disappearing. The brand was fading into irrelevance. Many believed Apple's story was over. Ironically, Microsoft had won too hard. With no real competition, innovation slowed. Windows became bloated. Complacency set in. Microsoft didn't need to change, and that would soon become its biggest weakness. Then the impossible happened. Steve Jobs returned to Apple. And one of his first major moves shocked the entire tech world. Apple announced a partnership with Microsoft. On stage, behind Jobs, appeared Bill Gates, projected on a massive screen. The audience booed loudly. To them, this felt like betrayal. Microsoft invested in Apple, committed to continuing Office for Mac, and effectively saved Apple from collapse. Why would Bill Gates save his biggest rival? Because Apple dying would trigger serious antitrust consequences for Microsoft. And because Gates understood something Jobs always believed: rivalry creates innovation. Apple survived. And then it started planning revenge. Instead of fighting Microsoft where it was strongest, Apple changed the battlefield entirely. First came the iPod. Then iTunes. Apple didn't just sell a device, it rebuilt the music industry. It created an ecosystem that locked users in. Microsoft tried to respond. Zune failed. Then came the iPhone. This was the moment everything changed. Microsoft dismissed it, laughed at it, thought it was a toy, thought physical keyboards mattered more than touchscreens. Apple didn't just release a phone. It redefined computing again. Microsoft scrambled to respond. Windows Phone arrived too late. Developers ignored it. Consumers had already moved on. The power balance flipped completely. Apple became the most valuable company in history. Microsoft, once feared and untouchable, was suddenly labeled slow and irrelevant. But the story didn't end there. Microsoft reinvented itself quietly. It shifted toward cloud computing, enterprise services, and infrastructure. While Apple focused on consumers, Microsoft focused on the backbone of the digital world. Today, the war is quieter, but far more dangerous. Microsoft dominates cloud infrastructure, enterprise software, and artificial intelligence integration. Apple dominates consumer loyalty, hardware margins, and ecosystem lock-in. They no longer fight for the same territory, but they are still competing. Different strategies. Same objective. Control the future. So who really won? Apple wins hearts. Microsoft wins infrastructure. Apple shapes culture. Microsoft powers operations. Each company exists in part because the other does. Their rivalry forced them to evolve, adapt, and innovate. Without Microsoft, Apple might never have become what it is. Without Apple, Microsoft might have stagnated forever. This rivalry didn't just shape two companies. It shaped how we work, communicate, and interact with technology every single day. And that's why this war never ends. Because in technology, there is no final victory. Only temporary dominance. And the moment you believe you've won is usually the moment you start losing. If you enjoyed this story and want more deep dives into the rivalries that shaped our world, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because the next war is already beginning.